Welcome to the Holistic Accountant Podcast. Before we get in today's episode, just a quick note. From July, this show's changing its name to Business by Design. The new name reflects where this podcast has naturally evolved, helping you start, scale, or exit a business. Same hosts, same practical focus, just a sharper name for what we want to do here. Right, let's get into it. Okay, today I'd like to talk about soliciting customer client feedback and satisfaction as a way of, measuring performance in your business. I'm really surprised that a lot of businesses don't do this, and the businesses that do it very, very poorly, to the extent that I think they're better off actually, if you're not going to do it and do it properly, don't actually do it at all. So this idea for today's episode occurred when my family went and had a lunch at a restaurant. I'm not going to name the restaurant in Melbourne that's been around for a long time, and over that time mostly has had a good reputation. Anyway, we thought the food was okay, but the service was ordinary, and you could see the wait staff were just sort of dialing in. They pretended to be interested and friendly, but you could see they actually didn't care about their job. They didn't care about the experience in the restaurant, and it really showed. The training was poor. They might serve, they'll lean over, the person sitting next to the other person to drop a plate or something like that. Look, not major things, but you could really get a very good sense that it wasn't really working. Anyway, as is mostly the case when you go out to a restaurant, you'll receive an email within 24 hours asking for feedback. So I gave the feedback saying, look, used to be a great restaurant. It feels like the training's, a little bit down, and we just felt, they were sort of dialing it in. And the restaurant responded, but with a very templated response, like they didn't even really read my feedback. And all it did is just made the situation worse. I thought, firstly, whoever owns that business, and it's a corporate now rather than an individual. That's always, it tends to be the case. Whoever owns and runs that business doesn't care. And all they did is just reconfirm by the way that they responded that we don't really care, because they asked for the feedback and they didn't even bother to spend the time to give me a non-templated response. So really, requesting feedback from customers should be seen more as an operational measure rather than a PR or marketing measure. I mean, there are some marketing elements to it, but really what we want to do is we want to regularly test how our customers are feeling about our service, and that's what we want to talk about today.
Now, feedback doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. We've got a saying in our business that we blame the system rather than the person. So when a customer provides feedback, whether good or bad, it gives you a sort of point in time to actually reflect on your process, your product, your systems. Now, when it comes to feedback mechanisms, like Stuart mentioned, a lot of businesses sort of ignore them. They just maybe might apologize, even if they feel that they're in the right. I know personally in our business, for example, we might get feedback where we're completely in the right, but it's just a feedback item around how the process could be improved. Now, for a lot of businesses, they might go back and sort of think, oh, well, that's not really a big deal. We're actually in the right. There's nothing wrong here. But it's really important for you to take a step back. Okay, we've got this feedback. Now, could we have actually improved the process? Should we have done something? By using what Stuart's example around the restaurant, it really signals sort of an indifference to that customer. We don't really care about the customer. We've got the reputation, we've got the brand. Especially in hospitality, all it takes is a few bad reviews, and all of a sudden that restaurant's no longer popular. So it's really important to respond with a non-neutral response. Understand where the customer's coming from and understand what you could do in your business to actually improve your system, process, or product.
Now, this is going to sound a little contradictory, but it's important to not listen to every single bit of feedback that you get. So I think firstly, the question we need to ask when we get some feedback is, was our product and service built for that individual? So, Seth Godin, which I follow, he's a marketing expert in the US, says that he has a saying, as soon as you want everyone, you want no one. So that is that if you're trying to make your product and service appeal to the masses, the reality is it's probably not going to appeal to anyone. And so you've got to find your smallest viable audience, which is the number of people that, your business can thrive upon, and build a product or service that meets their specific desires and needs. So the first thing when you do survey customers and clients is to firstly ask yourself, are they a target customer? Was this product or service built for them? For instance, if someone someone is looking, if you're providing a service with a lot of bells and whistles, a premium service, and the customer's saying the price is too much, and that customer's really just only interested in the absolute lowest price without even considering the value they're receiving, well, there's no point listening to that feedback because that product isn't built for them. The second thing to think about when you get feedback is it could be a communication issue rather than an assessment on your ability to sort of deliver value or deliver on your product. So it could be a miscommunication about expectations, what the product or service included, the scope of that product or service. It could be a misunderstanding of who does what. So, for example, in our mortgage broking team, we'll ask for customer feedback. Sometimes the customer will say, look, the bank stuffed something up, the bank made an error in loan documents. Well, we get the feedback. It's negative in terms of the whole process, but it's not part of the process that we own or control. So you've got to have those two gates in terms of target customer and is this something that we can own or control? Now, you can still use that feedback. So, for example, if you're getting a lot of feedback from customers that aren't target customers, that can be a sign that your marketing materials or your sales process might need tightening up. And similarly, if you're getting feedback that, is out of scope or the mortgage broking situation where it's the bank's fault, again, you might be able to tighten up your communication processes so that customers understand what parts of the process you're in control of and what parts of the process that you're not in control of. But ultimately, what we're really after is, are our customers happy and are we delivering on value to those customers that we've promised? So Mina's going to talk about, how to put together a customer survey, but I just wanted to briefly mention Net Promoter Score, which was some research that was put together by a guy that worked for Boston Consulting Group, and they did a whole bunch of historical surveys, and what they did is had a look at what are the questions we're asking in these feedback surveys, and then they went to measure lifetime customer value, and they wanted to then empirically trying to link which question was the best predictor of economic success. And so it was a very deep study and they came up with the Net Promoter Score. And the Net Promoter Score sentence is something along the lines of, on a rating of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend our product or business to a friend or colleague? So that's the question. And a lot of businesses now use Net Promoter Score, and essentially if they give you a rating of 0 to 6, they're detractors. So it actually means they're doing damage to your business because they're probably telling people that, your business isn't great. If they rate 7 to 8, they're considered passives. So which means that they're not that particularly enthusiastic about your business. And if they rate 9 or 10 out of 10, then they're loyal fans and they're promoters. And to work out your Net Promoter Score, you take your promoters, number of or percentage of promoters, and subtract the number or percentage of detractors, which gives you an NPS score. For businesses that score very poorly, that NPS score could be negative. For businesses that, are killing it and delivering great value, it could be 50 or more in terms of NPS score. So it's widely used and you've probably come across it, like the banks use it, large corporates in Australia now use it and been adopting over the last sort of decade or so. But the downside with Net Promoter Score is the question is, would you refer to our business or recommend our business? Not have you. And I think have you is a far more important question because ultimately that's what you understand. You want to understand or measure. To what extent are your existing clients and customers talking about your business and your product or service to friends, colleagues, or anyone that might benefit from them? And if they're not talking about it, why not? What are you doing wrong? Do they not know it? Are they really delighted, but do they not know how to talk about it or how to bring it up? Sometimes, for example, they don't want to make a referral because they don't want you to get too busy and not be able to service them. Sometimes it can be as selfish as that. What you want to understand is, are they? And so what we like to do is ask that exact question. Have you spoken about the services that Pro Solution provides to anyone in the last 6 months? Some people just aren't going to make referrals, and that's fine. Like some people just perceive referrals as risky. They don't want to refer someone and then that adverse adversely affect their relationship with that business or adversely reflect the relationship with their friend if they have a bad experience and there's not a right fit. And there's nothing you can do about that. That's fine. It is what it is. What you really want to do is drill down to the people that actually are quite happy to make referrals when they think that their friend or colleague will really benefit from the product or service you provide. And then what you want to make sure is that you're doing everything that you should be doing to delight that customer and measure it. And so I just wanted to bring up the NPS sort of methodology, if you like, because I think I'm not arguing about the empirical studies and evidence that they came up to identify the question, but I think there's a better way to kind of ask that question. And that's what you want to be when you're doing a survey. What you really want to understand is whether this particular customer, whether I've done a good enough job for this customer to make my service remarkable. Remarkable really means just worthy of remark. And if all your customers are talking to all their friends and family about the service or product you're providing, your business will explode, of course.
So let's talk about the actual feedback system, so how it should work. Now, we've probably all seen those for a long sort of surveys that you receive from any sort of provider, and a long survey is less likely to be completed. Like if I think about, for example, a hotel, when they send you a feedback survey, it's usually a whole bunch of questions around how was the breakfast, how would you rate the linen, how was the bed, how's the location of our hotel, and all these kind of things. It takes you 10 to 15 minutes to probably just even look at the questions, let alone answer them. And those ones aren't really going to provide you with as much sort of insight because you're not going to get a lot of the population actually completing them. A feedback survey should be short. It should be 3 to 5 questions at the absolute most. 3 preferred, 5 on the outer limit. So it's really important to actually ascertain what you're trying to get out of the survey. What information do you want from your customer that will actually reflect on your business? Now, the timing is also critical. Now, sending the survey a week, a month later after the value has actually been provided is pointless. It should really be near or shortly after, the day after the actual event or value has been provided. Like Stuart mentioned in the restaurant example, it was the day after. It was still fresh in his mind. He could still provide the accurate feedback about what occurred on that day.
Now, once you've designed the feedback survey and implemented it, the next thing to think about in your system and process is how you're going to respond to it. Because what I would say is don't ask for feedback if you're not going to acknowledge it, firstly, and respond to it. There's actually no point because we all experience, right? How many feedback surveys do we complete? Not many. I try and avoid them. But of the ones that I do complete, how many do you get a response from? You'd count on one hand how many that is. Most businesses don't even bother. And I think it's a really poor example. Even if you get negative feedback, it's a great opportunity to show how you're going to respond to that negative feedback, that you care, that you're going to take action, that you're going to put in place whatever training or system enhancements to ensure that issue doesn't happen again. Quite often, a negative bit of feedback or negative experience is a great opportunity to turn a client around and actually create a client that ends up being a raving fan of your business. Because it shows that care about the outcome. Everyone knows that not every business gets it right every single time, but they like businesses that are trying and they like teams that are trying to do their best. And it's a great opportunity to sort of respond to that. So what you want to do is put in place a process that still can use templates, but you don't want it to seem like it's templated. So if someone says, look, so for example, the feedback that I gave the restaurant that I thought the staff were disengaged, my response to that feedback would have been, thanks for actually sharing the time to give us that feedback. Because firstly, everyone's busy and it's a gesture of generosity to actually give you feedback. So thank them. The second thing I would do is acknowledge what the feedback is. So I hear that, that you felt that the service wasn't genuine and they were just sort of dialing in, and that's not the level of service that we expect. And then what you've got to do is close the loop and say, okay, what are you going to do? We're going to review our training process. I've identified the staff members that were on shift that day, and we're going to have another team meeting or something. What that says is the business actually cares and they've listened to the feedback and they've responded. Similarly, if the feedback is fantastic, the same response is necessary as well. Thanks for being so generous in sharing the feedback. I'm glad you're delighted. We try really hard. We don't always get it right, but thank you for your ongoing loyalty or something along those lines. Same with Google reviews, because feedback can be also solicited through Google these days. Quite often you see businesses, they get positive Google reviews, but don't respond to them. Every Google review, whether it's negative or positive, really should get a response. So that is a key element to your whole feedback system, is how are you going to deal with the responses, who's responsible for responding to those bits of feedback, and how you're going to do it in a way that's still systemized and efficient as possible, but reconfirms to the person providing the feedback that you genuinely care. Now, this conversation today has been really about business to consumer sort of businesses, but what if you've got a B2B sort of business, Mena? How does it differ?
Now, with business to business, it's probably less transactional in a sense. You're dealing directly with a business that's more relationship based. And from that perspective, it's really important to actually probably have a conversation rather than a feedback survey. It's much easier for a business to go to a different supplier or a different advisor or something like that. So having that relationship is really key. Now, Seth Godin often says that referral makes you always look good to your boss. So, for example, if you're referring, for example, legal counsel, and you don't particularly have legal counsel in your business and you're referring someone else on, it's a reflection on you end of the day. He might not be the best legal counsel in the world, but you know that he's good enough to reflect well on you and your referral. So it's really important to understand business to business context working differently to business to consumer. Again, less transactional, more relationship based. You need to have more conversations to get that feedback. Now, typically with business to consumer, it's typically systemized. It's, that person gets an automated survey post an interaction. So, for example, a restaurant, you've made the booking, they've already got your email, they've got your phone number. 24 hours after the booking, you're going to receive that feedback survey. Whereas when in a relationship based sort of context or a business to business context, it's less systemized. It relies on the human to actually want to have that conversation and be disciplined enough to actually have that conversation. So it's really important to build a system for it. Understand who your key stakeholders are in your business relationships and force yourself or have a system in place that makes you actually go out and have those conversations with that relationship or stakeholder.
So let me finally finish on why is this important? What are we seeking to do? Well, of course, at a sort of very high level, we're seeking to measure the satisfaction in our client base. Are we doing a good job? But it's also important to understand that what we're also measuring is a change in customer appetite and desires, because what a customer might be or client might be happy with today might change in the future. Their expectations might change. Your competitors might be offering a different sort of process outcome value, feeling, whatever it might be. The systems and tools that you use in your business might have had an impact also on customer satisfaction. So you might implement a different process or strategy thinking that, or not realizing that it has an impact on how the customer experience is felt. And then you need a way of sort of identifying or picking that up as soon as possible. So it's an important feedback on your systems, on the product design, on the way you're delivering your product, and the way that your team is behaving. And that's why it's a very important metric to measure on an ongoing basis. The final element of why it's important to get that feedback is because it's a great opportunity to turn around customers that have had a poor experience. Like I said just a few minutes ago, it can be actually a great opportunity to create what is a disappointed customer into a raving fan about your business, just the way that you handle a situation that was less than optimal. And if you can take ownership, apologize, and make it right, quite often you can certainly turn that customer relationship around. So I think what you need to do now is really think about who in your business is responsible for gathering customer feedback. Do you have a process in place to do that? And if not, are you willing to commit to delivering the time and resources to do it properly, which is make sure you design a sort of feedback survey or process, depending if it's B2B, that is going to really give you the information you need, and make sure that you've got the training tools and resources to actually respond effectively to whatever feedback you receive. And then also make sure someone in your business owns that process. Okay, that's it for today. Until next week, bye for now. Thanks for listening. We're dedicated to producing practical, valuable insights for business owners, and this show grows through people like you. So if you found something useful today, the best way to help us and pay it forward is to leave a rating and review where you listen to your podcasts. It only takes a minute and it would genuinely help us. Also, if you know a business owner who would benefit, please share this episode with them. We'll see you next week.